We've been talking about the silence from a lot of Republicans. We do now have a statement just in from Senator John McCain. I want to read it to you in its entirety because it is a powerful statement. Senator McCain says, "Today's press conference in Helsinki was one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. The damage inflicted by President Trump's naivete, egotism, false equivalence, and sympathy for autocrats is difficult to calculate, but it is clear that the summit in Helsinki was a tragic mistake." Senator McCain went on to say President Trump proved not only unable but unwilling to stand up to Putin. He and Putin seemed to be speaking from the same script, as the president made a conscious choice to defend a tyrant against the fair questions of a free press and to grant Putin an uncontested platform to spew propaganda and lies to the world. He went on to say it is tempting to describe the press conference as a pathetic rout, as an illustration of the perils of under-preparation and inexperience, but these were not the errant tweets of a novice politician. These were the deliberate choices of a president who seems determined to realize his delusions of a warm relationship with Putin's regime without any regard for the true nature of his rule, his violent disregard for the sovereignty of his neighbors, his complicity in the slaughter of the Syrian people, and his violation of international treaties and his assault on democratic institutions throughout the world. Coming close on the heels of President Trump's bombastic and erratic conduct toward our closest friends and allies in Brussels and Britain, today's press conference marks a recent low point in the history of the American presidency. Senator McCain went on to say that the president was attended in Helsinki by a team of competent and patriotic advisors makes his blunders and capitulations all the more painful and inexplicable. No prior president has ever abased himself more abjectly before a tyrant. Not only did President Trump fail to speak the truth about an adversary, but speaking for America to the world, our president failed to defend all that makes us who we are, a republic of free people dedicated to the cause of liberty at home and abroad. American presidents must be the champions of that cause if it is to succeed. Americans are waiting and hoping for President Trump to embrace that sacred responsibility. One can only hope they are not waiting totally in vain. Those are the words of Senator John McCain. Moments ago, Senator Marco Rubio added these comments.
All I can speculate is that there is an effort underway to sort of figure out if by being nice to Vladimir Putin, there is a way that we can establish a better working relationship, which in a perfect world would not be a bad thing between two nations that possess 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. The flaw in that, which I think goes to the heart of this very issue, is that Vladimir Putin is not interested in a better working relationship with the United States because he views the world, he views geopolitics as a battle between the strong and the weak. He believes that at the end of the Cold War, the West, and in particular the United States, that was strong, took advantage of a weak Russia. He intends to reestablish Russia as a global world power on par with the United States. And he doesn't believe in win-win scenarios. He believes in zero-sum. And therefore, he thinks the only way to make Russia stronger is to make America weaker. And these election interference efforts are a part of it. And you have to understand that. Any policies that are not built on that reality, and I would say any rhetoric that's not built on that reality, is destined to be counterproductive, perhaps dangerous, and most certainly fail.
Well, I want to bring in Susan Glasser, CNN Global Affairs analyst, as well as Philip Mudd, CNN counterterrorism analyst. He's also a former CIA and FBI official. Senator McCain saying most disgraceful display, essentially, by an American president on the world stage. Phil, do you agree with that?
I do, but I mean, I think you have to step back even just a short time after this and say, what next? You've seen senators come out. In the past, we've seen a senator who's in the midst of a painful illness, Senator McCain. You've seen senators like Jeff Flake who are leaving the Senate. Now you see Marco Rubio still obviously in the fight, speaking out. My question would be, when do members of the president's inner circle start to say, look, we have an overseas dilemma where you are portraying us in terms of the American government as worse than a tyrant, that is Vladimir Putin. Secretary of Homeland Security came out with statements this week about continued Russian interference. This was not on Obama's watch, that's this week. FBI director continues the investigation. Department of Justice continues support for the investigation. Congress continues saying that this investigation is legitimate. Curious point in American government, when do we see almost a shadow government come out and say, we cannot side with the government, whether it's the cabinet or the Senate? I think that's the big question.
But frankly, look, I mean, there's silence on the side of many Trump supporters, and many Trump supporters, as the president once said, you know, he could shoot somebody in the street and they wouldn't blink, and maybe some people look at what happened here today and say, oh, it wasn't that bad.
Well, look, I think Phil is making an important point about the president's own government not supporting, in many respects, his Russia policy or having their own different Russia policy. Coming into this summit, we were told things that turned out to be really, in a word, not true. And you had the ambassador to Moscow, John Huntsman, saying that President Trump absolutely was going to call President Putin to account for this. You have the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, a year ago saying that the Russian hacking was akin to an act of war. Where was National Security Advisor John Bolton today? And I do think there's a significant question about how do they go forward.
Well, let's be honest. These people around the president have no idea what the president is going to do from moment to moment. I mean, it's why you have the press secretary lying from the podium time and time again, and then having to backtrack and say, well, I actually never spoke to the president, or I haven't spoken directly to the president about it. Nobody around the president knows what he's going to do. They give him briefing papers. He doesn't read them. He does exactly what he thinks. He goes with his gut, and his gut might have got him an elected president, but it certainly embarrasses the country on the world stage.
Well, I think that's an important point, especially because we do tend now, we're living in such a divisive and partisan moment in Washington. What I'm struck by, I just saw somebody say, tweeting, well, the only thing that matters now, in a way, politically, is whether Republicans respond and whether they're prepared to do anything about it. But, let's step back for a second. There's a whole world out there. It actually also matters, how does Vladimir Putin respond to basically being empowered and enabled by the President of the United States? Right now, he's been basically invited back into the Club of World Nations with no apparent penalty to pay, at least from the point of view of the United States, for having invaded Crimea, taken that over. This is the first illegal annexation of territory since the end of World War II. And so my question is, what is Vladimir Putin going to do in response to basically a blank check from Donald Trump? So it's not just about our partisan politics.
No, but Phil, you think about the people who all around the world are living under tyrants, who are living in tyranny, who are imprisoned for speaking out, who have traditionally looked to the United States as, what Reagan referenced as a shining city on a hill, and who look to the United States to at least speak truth to power, to raise human rights, to stand tall in the face of tyranny, and that you don't hear that from the United States now.
Well, it's even clearer. Let's look at a simple pattern that we've seen over 18 months. You look at the people that the president has praised, Duterte murdering thousands of drug offenders without due process.
President of the Philippines.
That's right. You look at what's happened in Turkey. You look at what's happened in Egypt, both dictators who are taking more power. You look at the president praising the North Korean leader. You look at what happened with a Russian leader today who's been involved in assassinations of opponents, who doesn't like a free press, who doesn't like democratic opposition. And you contrast that with the president who says, I don't like the G7 on trade policy and I don't trust the EU. What's the message to you in that pattern? I trust people who think like I do. I don't like CNN and I don't like Democrats. These people can operate like I want to operate. The EU, the Canadians, the Mexicans can't. Let me side with people who don't represent American principles but represent Trumpian principles. It's Trumpianism versus Americanism.
But it's also one thing to say that domestically when you're in the United States. To say it on the world stage next to one of the great tyrants living today is an extraordinary statement by the President of the United States.
Well, I think that, right now, it's sort of the death of American exceptionalism. Republicans, this used to be a criticism of Barack Obama, the idea that he came and he said, well, we're exceptional in the same way that Greeks feel that they're exceptional.
Had Barack Obama stood on that stage and done what President Trump did today, I mean, there's no telling what the Republican Party certainly would have said about it. I mean, they would be all over the airwaves, their heads exploding, and for valid reasons.
It was just the most partisan performance in an international forum like this that I've ever seen. It was dramatic in its ranting about the Electoral College, Hillary Clinton, the DNC, servers.
Which is such a sign of weakness. I mean, if you're Vladimir Putin, who's a trained intelligence operative, and you've read everything that Donald Trump has ever said, as anybody who's smart, who's going against Donald Trump would do, to actually have Donald Trump repeat his greatest hits, almost as if he was going to talk about crowd size at the inauguration. I mean, Vladimir Putin must have been just in his head thinking, I cannot believe what this guy is doing.
And the answer is why. The president just played golf over the weekend. Let's use golf. This is a 3-foot putt. You walk out like you did after North Korea and say, I spoke with somebody, I explained to you we had a bad relationship, I spent an hour and a half with him, I just fixed it. We're now in the future going to talk about arms control in Syria. I'm the leader of the world and I'm a genius. Instead, he steps right into it. It's psychology, it's not politics.
Yeah.